When a HOA Karen tried to evict me using fake zoning laws, I didn't yell, I didn't fight. I just raised her rent by 400% on the building she didn't know was on my land. Let me tell you how we got here, starting with the sound of a backhoe and a woman in sunglasses who thought she ran the valley. 6:43 AME, and the mist still hung low over Timberfield Valley like a warning. I was on the second floor of my cabin, kneeling by a rusted vent cover, screwdriver in hand, wondering if this would be the day the wind finally snapped the tin roof off for good. The coffee downstairs had gone cold. I hadn't even put on socks yet. That's when I felt it. Not a quake, not a storm, but a low mechanical tremor, like a bear growling through the soil. I looked up, and through the warped glass of the side window, I saw it. A backhoe, yellow, massive, and humming with a kind of bureaucratic arrogance. It wasn't parked. It was aiming right at the southeast corner of the cabin, the corner Sarah and I built first, with our hands in a lantern during our chemo nights. The one where Noah took his first steps across plywood floors with a spoon in his hand and jelly on his face. I bolted downstairs in half a breath, kicked open the screen door, and stormed onto the gravel, heart pounding. Two men stood just beyond the tree line, one with a clipboard and a smirk, the other tapping on a government-issued tablet like he was ordering from a menu. "You want to explain what the hell this is?" I asked, voice low and sharp. Clipboard guy didn't even flinch. "Preliminary demolition," he said. "According to Timberfield's updated zoning initiative, Harmony Ridge overlay, we've got encroachment on shared development space." I blinked. "I'm not in your damn HOA. As of last quarter, you are," he said flatly. Behind him, the machine's gears clanked to life again. "You trying to tear down my house because of a map redraw?" I said, stepping closer. The one with the tablet added, "We issued several notices." "No," I snapped, "you issued lies." And then she appeared, like a storm cloud in a windbreaker. Karen. Crisp beige coat, designer sunglasses despite the cloud cover, and her own clipboard, because of course she did. She walked like she owned the land, the sky, and probably the wind. "Mr. Monroe," she said with a customer service smile that had all the warmth of a tax audit, "let's not be hostile. This is a community transition, not an attack." "You're bulldozing my house," I said. "Not the entire structure," she cooed, "just the eastern outcrop. It violates our green aesthetics mandate." I laughed, but it wasn't humor. "That section is my house." She tilted her head, voice sugar-coated venom. "Was. Under the overlay expansion, it now falls within shared jurisdiction. I was elected interim president of the board last month." I squinted. "An impose, I bet." "Democracy is messy," she replied, still smiling. That's when Noah stepped out onto the porch behind me, still in pajamas, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Dad, are you filming this?" he asked. I didn't answer, just kept my eyes locked on Karen. "Mr. Monroe, you were offered a seat on the HOA board," she said. "You declined." "Because I knew the second I signed anything you'd pull this." "We are not your enemies," she insisted. "We're neighbors." "You're a HOA with a God complex," I shot back. She sighed. "You've got 72 hours to vacate the non-compliant section or allow us to proceed. If not, you'll be in violation of Development Charter 8B. I stepped forward. "You ever read the original deed to this land?" She blinked. I pulled the folded parchment from my coat like a magician producing a trapdoor. "This land's been in my family since before your bylaws had a font. Signed, sealed, and recorded. You want to challenge it in court? Be my guest. But if that machine touches 1 inch of this cabin," Aaron held up a hand, "there's no need for hostility." But her eyes flicked to the clipboard guy, who was now suddenly studying gravel like it held the meaning of life. "We'll reconvene," she said, "but I encourage cooperation. You still have an invitation to the board," she added. I smiled. "And you still have 30 days before I raise your rent." She froze, lips twitching. "Excuse me?" "Check who owns the land under your shiny little HOA office," I said. "It's not in your overlay, never was." Karen blinked. The tablet guy looked up like someone had just announced a fire drill. I didn't wait for them to react. I walked past the backhoe, past their neon survey flags planted in my soil, and back into the cabin where Noah stood staring like he'd just seen war declared in his front yard. And maybe he had. I didn't say a word after the door shut behind me, just kept walking until I reached the kitchen, pulled open the bottom drawer, and grabbed the rusted tin box we hadn't touched since Sarah's funeral. Noah watched me without asking questions. He knew better. The power was still on, for now. and the cabin creaked like it was waking up from a nightmare it hadn't asked for. I set the box on the table, cracked it open, and spread out the old land documents like a war map. Permits, hand-signed by my grandfather in '69. Surveyor maps yellowed with time, ink smudged but legible. Original lease agreements, including one detail I hadn't thought about in years. A subleased parcel tucked under the east border, labeled Community Access Only in small faded letters. That parcel, exact coordinates, was where the shiny new HOA headquarters sat like a parasite pretending it was a monarch. I grabbed the cabin's battered laptop and booted it up, dust puffing from the fan like it hadn't breathed in months. "Noah," I said, "pull up the GIS overlay for Timberfield County." He didn't hesitate. He was already typing. We laid our maps over the zoning PDFs, comparing line by line. "They redrew the boundary," he murmured. "Overlay claims your land is part of the HOA. They could claim the moon," I said. "Doesn't make it theirs." He zoomed in and tapped the screen. "Dad, their building. It sits right here." I nodded slowly. "On our dirt." The kicker? According to the original easement filed by my grandfather, any commercial structure on that parcel owed monthly rent. And not the handshake kind. Legally binding, inflation-adjusted, and retroactive. Karen hadn't just overstepped. She'd trespassed, built a glass palace, and forgot to pay the landlord. The moment I realized it, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, not scared. I was locked in. Like a circuit flipped and everything else became secondary. The way Karen strutted up my gravel with that clipboard, that wasn't HOA business. That was a hostile takeover wrapped in neighborhood watch jargon. She thought I'd fold because I lived quietly, because my beard was gray and I planted sunflowers instead of fences. But my wife's ashes were mixed into the soil by the porch, and that made this cabin sacred ground. You don't back a man into a corner and then act surprised when he stops backing up. I stood, grabbed the keys, and nodded to Noah. "Where are you going?" he asked. "The hardware store," I replied. "What for?" "To borrow a ghost." Shirley at the register didn't blink when I walked in, covered in sawdust and paperwork. "You building something or blowing it up?" she asked. "A little bit of both," I said, half smiling. "Need Ron?" She pointed to the basement. Ron was a legend in Timberfield, half handyman, half archivist. I found him elbow deep in PVC fittings, humming Springsteen like he owned the rights. "I need 1998 access permits," I said. "And anything you've got on unfiled zoning disputes." He didn't ask why, just muttered, "Took you long enough," and started digging. 25 minutes later, I walked out with a manila folder so thick it groaned under its own weight. Inside, a copy of the lease agreement for the parcel the HOA was sitting on, and a clause Karen had definitely never read. If structure exceeds 660 CEFT, land rent reverts to private assessment. Their building was 840. I drove home slow, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel the shape of the war I'd just stepped into. Back at the cabin, Noah was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, eyes worried. "You get what you needed?" he asked. I held up the file. "I got rent due," but just as I stepped through the doorway, he added, "Dad, someone was here." I froze. "Who?" "Dean. Said he was just checking in, but he asked weird stuff. If we had backup heat, how much food we keep, if the cabin's insulated." My stomach dropped through the floorboards. Dean hadn't been inside this place in 3 years, not since Sarah died. And if he was asking about heat, he wasn't just visiting, he was probing. And that meant one thing: they weren't planning to push anymore. They were planning to freeze us out. I didn't speak, just set the folder on the table and walked straight to the back window, the one facing the tree line where Dean used to help me chop wood every fall. The silence between Noah and me felt like a held breath, like even the walls knew what that visit meant. Dean wasn't curious, he was scouting. And the worst part, he knew exactly what this cabin meant to us. He'd poured concrete with me the week we broke ground, held Sarah's hand when the treatments failed, showed up with lasagna the night I told Noah she was gone. That's what betrayal feels like when it's personal, not fire, not thunder, just cold clarity. I didn't need a confrontation, I needed proof. So that night I checked the old trail cams, one hid in the pine by the generator, one in a birdhouse Sarah built out of cedar. At 2:14 a.m., and they showed what I expected. Dean, 2 others, HOA vests, one carrying bolt cutters, another holding what looked like a blueprint tube. Dean looked straight at the lens before vanishing back into the trees. The next morning, I didn't pace, didn't rant. I just moved. I pulled out the sealed crate under the basement stairs, the one I hadn't opened since we buried her. Inside, every legal file, deed, signed contract, and buried under a stack of permits, an original survey map that showed every boundary marker we ever hammered into soil. I ran my finger down the faded ink until I found it, the easement line beat, the one Dean had helped stake out with a rented transit scope back in E4. That line cut directly beneath the HOA office's parking lot, and here's the part Karen really wouldn't like. It was labeled private utility right-of-way, no public use without consent, which meant the HOA hadn't just trespassed, they'd built over a restricted zone without a single recorded annexation. I didn't need to yell, I just needed to wait for the paperwork to land like a grenade with a smiling paperclip. That evening, I stepped out to split some logs, not for heat, not yet, but because the rhythm steadied me. I was halfway through a red oak chunk when I heard the gravel crunch. I didn't look up. I knew the sound of Dean's boots before I saw his shadow. "Morning," he said, like it was any other day. Like he hadn't walked into my life last night wearing betrayal like a work vest. I didn't answer, just raised the axe, brought it down, and let the crack ring through the valley like punctuation. "You've been hard to reach," he offered. "Noah said you were keeping to yourself." I set another log, another swing, another clean break. "They're saying you're stockpiling documents," he added, "that you're sabotaging the HOA. I turned slowly, letting the silence stretch until the birds stopped chirping. "Karen doesn't send people to talk," I said. "She sends them to dig." His smile twitched. "It's not what you think. You brought bolt cutters onto my property," I said, "at night with men in vests." His hands went up. "They said you were spiraling, Caleb, that you were becoming a threat." I didn't blink. "And you thought if you poked around enough, you could save face with both sides?" I stepped forward. "You handed them access to documents Sarah and I buried under 20 years of trust. And now you're here with your porch voice like this is a bake sale." Noah stepped out just then, arms crossed, silent but sharp. Dean looked at him like he still had a right to. "Kids don't need to hear this," he said. "He's not a kid," I replied. "He's the one who installed the cameras that caught you." Dean looked small then, not guilty, cornered. He glanced at the trees like maybe he could walk back into them and undo it all. "I didn't know Karen would go this far," he muttered. "She always goes this far," I said. "You just never wanted to admit it." And with that, I pulled the trespass order from my pocket and handed it to him. "You'll get the formal copy tomorrow, and a bill for every square foot your boots stood on." He flinched. "Caleb, I'm not the enemy." I didn't raise my voice. "No, you're worse, because I trusted you." He didn't argue, just nodded, turned, and walked back down the gravel, the same path Sarah once danced barefoot on with fireflies in her hair. And when the gate clicked shut behind him, I didn't feel victorious. I felt like I'd just cut off the last root of something that used to be safe. Inside, Noah and I didn't speak for a while. We just sat at the table as the last of the light disappeared behind the mountains. The folder still lay open in front of us, maps overlapping legal clauses like battle lines. "Do you think he ever deserved to be part of this?" Noah finally asked. I didn't look up. "Back then, maybe, but some people change." He nodded slowly. "What about us?" I met his eyes. "We don't change," I said. "We adapt." And as I said it, the power went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, but cut completely, like someone somewhere wanted to remind us this wasn't over, it was just heating up. The darkness didn't scare me, it pissed me off. I didn't move right away, just sat there as the cabin sank into silence, the kind that wasn't peaceful but deliberate, like someone had flipped a switch expecting I'd fold along with the lights. I reached under the sink, pulled out the backup lantern, and lit it with a flint striker Sarah insisted we keep for real emergencies. The room glowed amber, casting long shadows over the table stacked with deeds and topographic maps. "They cut the power," Noah said quietly, standing at the window. "Third time this month," I nodded. "But this time it's personal." I grabbed the satellite battery pack from the closet and snapped it into the power junction box like a mechanic rearming a tank. "Let's make sure they understand that next time the lights stay on their dime." We ate dinner cold that night, canned beans and sourdough from the freezer, sitting in the glow of a lantern like it was wartime and we were holding the line. Noah kept glancing out the door like he expected another visitor, maybe Karen in a robe with a subpoena, or worse, more bolt cutters. "Do you think she'll come back?" he asked. "No," I said. "She'll send someone else. She always uses someone else's hands when she wants to make a mess." He nodded slowly, then walked to the fireplace and pulled out a box I hadn't seen since Sarah passed. Inside were every HOA newsletter we ever received, some crumpled, some unopened. We started reading. It was like unraveling the diary of a cult. Hidden in plain sight were notes about compliance campaigns, community corrections, and the one that got me, emergency beautification enforcement. "What even is that?" Noah asked. "It's HOA slang for demolition," with a smile. By midnight, the cabin was humming with planning energy. I printed 3 letters on the old inkjet that coughed like a dying cat but still got the job done. The first addressed to the Harmony Ridge HOA Board, the second to the Timberfield County Office of Land Use and Development. The third, and my personal favorite, was for the Cedar Ridge Weekly, subject line, "Private landowner exposes HOA overreach and lease fraud." Each envelope bulged with copies of deeds, surveillance photos, overlay contradictions, and a personal statement that began with, "You are currently operating on private restricted land in violation of Ordinance 113B." The kind of letter that doesn't just ask questions, it shoves them into the spotlight with a bullhorn. Noah sealed the envelopes and looked up. "You're mailing these?" "No," I said, grabbing my boots. "I'm hand-delivering them. These aren't letters. They're torpedoes." The HOA office looked like every overfunded suburban bunker. Neatly trimmed bushes, a banner that said "Together We Grow," and exactly one parking spot labeled "President." I stepped through the glass door with my folder under one arm and zero intention of leaving quietly. The assistant, a twitchy kid in a pastel tie, blinked when I approached. "Can I help you, sir?" "Give this to Karen," I said, sliding the envelope across the counter. He glanced at it, hesitated, then asked, "Is this legal stuff?" "It's truth in a folder," I said, then turned and left before he could invent a reason to stop me. At the county office, I dropped the second envelope with the clerk, who looked like he'd already seen too much HOA drama for one lifetime. But the final stop, that was personal. I walked through the back door of the Cedar Ridge Weekly and handed the last envelope straight to Greg Hill, the only journalist in town who didn't flinch at words like eminent domain and property line ethics. He skimmed the file, eyes widening. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "They built their empire on dirt that doesn't belong to them." I just end the bill. By noon the next day, the first tremors of panic started leaking through the cracks. I was still logged into the HOA's internal app, an oversight on their part, or maybe they figured I was too backwoods to know how to uninstall it. Either way, it paid off. Chat threads were going nuclear. "Why did we know about the lease? Who approved the build out? Karen, did you see this clause? This says we owe what in back rent?" It was like watching a dam break, except the flood was made of legal terms and emoji reactions. At 2:15 p.m., they called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited. I went anyway, not to speak, just to watch. Karen was mid-diatribe at the whiteboard, waving a dry erase marker like a sword. And when I walked through the back door, the room fell silent. Not out of respect, but out of fear, because the man holding the folder didn't just bring paperwork, he brought eviction. Karen froze mid-sentence, marker still in the air, like she'd been caught drawing crime plans on a kindergarten wall. The other board members turned toward me with the kind of panic usually reserved for fire alarms and surprise audits. I didn't say a word at first, just walked to the far end of the conference table, laid the folder down with deliberate care, and flipped it open to Section 12, Emergency Utility Jurisdiction, I said calmly. Addendum filed under private easement retention, line item 4. Karen blinked like I was speaking Aramaic. The bald guy who always voted against dog park upgrades leaned in to read. "Is this saying we're on the wrong land?" I nodded. "Not just wrong, privately owned by me since 1998, and you've owed back rent for 11 months. Silence. The kind that builds pressure behind eyeballs and turns people into liars. Karen finally broke it with a voice that cracked like paint. "This is retaliation." "No," I said, "this is rent." She pointed at me with the marker like it doubled as a wand. "You can't just walk in here and threaten us. You gave me 72 hours to vacate my home," I said. "I'm giving you 30 days to pay up." That's more grace than I got. Another board member muttered, "Can we see the deed?" Karen glared at him like he'd just sold the HOA's soul. "Are you seriously entertaining this?" "Entertaining?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "This meeting is being held in a building you don't legally occupy. That makes me the only person here withstanding." Then, as if the gods of timing had been waiting for their cue, Greg Hill, the reporter, stepped into the doorway, camera in hand, recorder on. Karen's face drained of color like she'd just seen the ghost of due process. "This meeting is over," she hissed. "For you, maybe," I said, "but not for the county, not for the press, and definitely not for the IRS." I left. Without slamming the door, I wanted the sound of her kingdom crumbling to echo naturally. Outside, Noah waited by the truck, hands in his pockets, eyes wide. "Did it work?" he asked. "Oh, yeah," I said. She blinked. We didn't even get halfway home before the retaliation started. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful, empty. The mailbox was gone. In its place, a steel post capped with a small dome camera blinking red like it was keeping score. A little HOA gift, watching her porch like a sentry. I stood there for 10 seconds, just breathing. Then I smiled. Not out of amusement, but confirmation. Karen wasn't trying to fight me in court anymore. She was trying to wear me down. Subtle pressure, silent war, and she had no idea I was built for storms. Noah came outside holding a flyer he found wedged under our door frame. Glossy, heavy stock, red block letters, community safety notice. The subhead read, "Cabin owner under federal watch list investigation." Bullet points included everything from uninspected wiring to emotional instability and potential threat to neighborhood harmony. It was slick, designed not to accuse outright, but to infect minds. "They're trying to make us look like a threat," Noah said. "They're not trying," I replied. "They're laying groundwork, narrative control. This isn't HOA anymore. This is character assassination." He frowned. "Isn't this libel?" "Only if I lose," I said. "Right now it's just Karen screaming into glossy paper." We checked the neighborhoods, over 20 copies distributed. Some neighbors pretended not to see. A few nodded as we passed. One anonymous text came in, "If your cabin goes up in flames, don't say we didn't warn you." I didn't get angry. I got ready. That night, I pulled out the old speaker rig from my shed, the one we used during Sarah's canine search drills, and mounted it on the porch, hooked it up to the generator, set it to loop a low, firm recording every 20 minutes. "This property is under private surveillance. Trespassers will be prosecuted under Federal Code 19.4. Kept the volume just under the legal limit, enough to unsettle, enough to send a message. By 9:14 p.m., the gravel stirred again. Karen marched up the drive in full HOA armor, clipboard purse, posture like a court summons. "You're violating noise regulations," she snapped. "It's 58 decibels," I said. "Legal limit's 60. She blinked. "It's aggressive." "So is tearing down someone's home," I replied. She pulled out a folded letter and slapped it onto my porch rail. "This is a community escalation notice." I laughed. "You invented a new level of paperwork? Is this the HOA's version of DEFCON 2? Her jaw tightened. "The board has a duty to protect this neighborhood." I stepped closer. "No, you just want to control it, and you don't know how to handle people who don't salute." She stared at me for half a beat, then turned and walked away without another word. But I knew she wasn't finished, because when bullies lose control, they don't disappear. They double down. The next morning, I found tire tracks in the shape of vengeance. Someone had dumped an entire load of mulch on our driveway. No note, no receipt, just a steaming, splintered heap right where my truck should have been. It wasn't random. It was HOA grade petty. Noah stood beside me, arms crossed, still groggy in his hoodie. "Retaliation?" he asked. "Confirmation," I replied. We both knew what this meant. Karen had moved into her whisper campaign phase, throwing dirt with a smile and hoping something stuck. But this wasn't just about flyers or midnight mulch. This was conditioning. Make me react, make me crack, make me fit the profile she was writing. But I had no intention of playing my part. I shoveled the mulch out of the way like it was just another Tuesday chore. If Karen wanted a villain, she'd have to write her own ending. By noon, we found the next chapter, an envelope tucked beneath the wiper blade of the cabin's only window-facing car. Same glossy stock, this time labeled behavioral concern, notice with a logo that wasn't even real. Some made-up department called Neighborhood Stability Advisory Board. It accused me of volatile emotional outbursts and disruptive surveillance audio. Karen had stopped pretending she was a president. She was going full dictator. This isn't even a real agency, Noel said, holding the paper up to the sun. Doesn't have a website, phone, or seal. I smiled. That's because it's not for the government. It's for the neighbors. Because Karen wasn't trying to convince authorities. I'd already beat her there. She was trying to poison the well. Discredit me in the eyes of anyone still watching, which meant the next move would go beyond property lines. It would go straight for my family. At 3:22 p.m., a silver sedan with county plates pulled into our drive. No lights, no sirens, just silence dressed like civility. The man who stepped out looked like he taught high school math or led Sunday soccer practice, clipboard in hand, business casual to the bone. Mr. Monroe? That's me, I said, already knowing what came next. We received an anonymous tip through Child and Family Services. I need to ask a few questions. The ground didn't move, but my stomach did. About what? I asked, voice steady. Concerns about emotional neglect, potential environmental risks, and reports of erratic behavior. He glanced toward the cabin where Noah sat at the table, headphones on, blueprint spread in front of him. Is that your son? Yes, I said. He's designing a drone surveillance rig. Would you like to see it? He gave the clipboard a nervous glance, like maybe it hadn't prepared him for sarcasm. We walked through the cabin. He noted the pantry, the heating system, the fire extinguishers, the water filters. He asked about school attendance, emotional stability, screen time, even whether Noah had a social circle. Each question was framed in professional language, but the subtext was clear. Are you a danger? And more importantly, can we write it down? When he left, Noah stood at the window, silent, watching his car disappear behind the trees. She said I wasn't safe, he said finally. She doesn't even know me. I put a hand on his shoulder. That's the point, I said. If she knew you, it'd be harder to lie. And while I stood there holding a son who deserved better, I realized something sharper than rage. Karen wasn't just playing HOA anymore. She was trying to take away the one thing I couldn't replace. That night, I made 3 calls. The first was to Jeff Parker, my old law contact, who owed me 2 favors and a bottle of bourbon. You want to go after her? He asked. No, I said. I wanted to surround her with enough truth that lies stop working. The second was to Susan Cortez, who ran the County Oversight Ethics Committee. She'd seen her fair share of bad politics and wasn't allergic to the word subpoena. The third was to a man I hadn't spoken to in 12 years, Samuel Knox. Not a lawyer, not a cop, just someone who specialized in making the invisible very visible. Background ops, public pressure, and a talent for dragging secrets into the sun. She's baiting you, he said. She wants rage on record. She came after my son, I replied. I'm not angry. I'm done being polite, he paused. Then you called the right man. The next morning, I had a plan. Not for revenge, for leverage. Karen wanted a narrative where I was the madman in the woods, so I gave her something better, silence. While she barked orders and built fantasy agencies, I built evidence. I drafted another packet, this one not to the HOA, not even to the county. It was labeled for the state attorney's office. Inside, a full timeline of HOA harassment, the forged beautification forms, the surveillance photos, the tampered zoning overlays, and the false CPS report. I didn't accuse her. I didn't have to. All I did was connect the dots. Because when the dots form a noose, people tend to ask, who's holding the rope? And in this case, the handwriting on the knot was very, very familiar. 2 days later, the air in Timberfield Valley felt thinner, not quieter, more like something had been sucked out of it. Karen hadn't been seen since the county issued a formal request for her HOA's financial disclosures. Word traveled fast, especially in a neighborhood where everyone pretended not to gossip. One neighbor accidentally left their porch camera pointed at the HOA office all morning. Another forgot to take down a banner reading, "We stand with Monroe," from their fence. I didn't ask for allies. But when liars get loud enough, even the quiet ones start picking sides. And then, as if some ancient suburban god finally decided to cash in a debt, it happened. A plain manila envelope showed up on my porch. No stamp, no return address, just one word scribbled on the front in shaky all caps black ink, confession. I didn't touch it at first, just stared at it while it sat there like it was breathing. Noah hovered nearby, arms folded, unsure whether to treat it like evidence or a curse. She dropped it off, he asked. Someone did, I said. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might bite. Inside were 5 handwritten pages, ballpoint pen, Karen's signature curled on every capital letter. She hadn't written an apology. She'd written a collapse. The first line read, "I've lost control and I don't know how to stop." The rest was a firestorm of admissions. She laid out everything: the falsified meeting notes, the unapproved surveillance installations, the misused HOA funds that went toward private security upgrades and beautification projects that just so happened to target dissenters. But the part that made my hand shake, she admitted to forging Sarah's name on a fake beautification waiver to justify the original demolition notice. "I didn't think you'd notice," she wrote. "I thought grief made people sloppy." Noah read that line over my shoulder. I felt him stop breathing. "Burn it," he said. I didn't respond, because deep down I wanted to. I wanted to toss those pages into the fire and watch the ink curl and die. But that would have been too clean, too easy. Instead, I slid the confession into a folder with the rest of the legal documents and walked straight into the county commissioner's office. I didn't need to make a speech. They'd already received my earlier reports. This was just the exclamation point. By the end of the next business day, Karen was officially suspended from the HOA board pending a full audit. Within the week, the entire HOA board voted to dissolve itself under threat of legal action and public inquiry. Karen didn't show up to the vote. She didn't call. She didn't leave a forwarding address. She just vanished, like a storm that finally realized it wasn't welcome anymore. 2 days after her disappearance, Dean showed up again. No clipboard, no excuses, just a hammer in one hand and a bucket of nails in the other. "Thought I'd help fix the porch," he said. I stepped out, arms crossed. But it was Noah who spoke first. "We don't need your hammer," he said, "or your guilt." Dean didn't argue, didn't beg. He just nodded, turned around, and walked down the gravel path like a man finally understanding which bridges he'd burned beyond repair. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive with slamming doors or grand speeches. Sometimes it just looks like a man walking away while nobody stops it. After that, the cabin didn't magically feel lighter, but it did breathe again. The power stayed on, the camera on the mailbox disappeared, the flyers dried up like a bad rumor in a good town. We planted sunflowers again, Noah's idea. Mrs. Hargrove brought over a pie and muttered something about glad someone finally took that clipboard tyrant down a peg. The community, the real one, not the version from Karen's pamphlets, started showing up again. Some brought casseroles, some just waved without suspicion, but they all had the same look in their eyes, like maybe the spell had been broken. One afternoon, while bolting the last beam on the new front steps, Noah looked over and asked, "So, it's done?" I tightened the last nut and exhaled. "For now," I said, "but people like Karen don't vanish forever. They wait, they regroup, they find new neighborhoods." He smirked. "Maybe they'll think twice next time." I nodded, staring out at the pine line beyond the drive. "Maybe, or maybe we just make sure the next guy who tries to pull this doesn't forget what happened the last time someone brought a clipboard into the wrong run." The next week, a new notice went up on the old HOA bulletin board. The same board Karen once used to post fines for grass height and unauthorized wind chimes. This time it wasn't laminated, it wasn't even typed. Just red marker on plain paper, taped crooked and flapping in the breeze. 3 words: emergency town meeting. No agenda, no time limit, no mention of Karen. I showed up anyway, mostly out of curiosity. So did 23 other residents, some I hadn't seen in months. They stood around folding chairs in what used to be the HOA office, now stripped bare of plaques and smug slogans. Mrs. Hargrove brought cookies. Someone else brought a box fan. It was awkward, unofficial, and perfect. What started as small talk turned into proposals, ideas, rebuilding, not with control, but cooperation. Someone even joked about turning the old HOA building into a community library/tool shed. They asked if I'd consider helping form a new neighborhood committee, one that wasn't obsessed with paint swatches and mailbox uniformity. I said I'd think about it. I didn't want power. I'd seen too clearly what it did to people like Karen. But I did want something better left behind, a reminder that silence isn't always safety, and that property lines aren't the only boundaries worth defending. "We could call it Timberfield Roots," someone offered. "A committee that actually remembers why we moved here." People chuckled. No one rolled their eyes. Back at the cabin, I tucked Karen's confession into a worn file box, the kind with rusted hinges and faded labels. It sat beside a copy of the original deed. Sarah's blueprint sketches, and a photo of her laughing in front of the cabin frame, boots muddy, hair blowing while clipboard in one hand, her clipboard. The irony didn't escape me. She'd hated micromanagement, hated rules for rules' sake, but she loved structure, integrity, truth, everything Karen tried to fake with a signature. I didn't burn the confession. I didn't need to. Its power wasn't in its ink. It was in the fact that I outlived it, that we did. That night, Noah and I stood on the new front porch, arms resting on the fresh railings we'd built ourselves. The pine boards still smelled like sawdust and clean slates. The stars came out like they always had, uncaring, unsupervised. "Do you think she's really gone?" he asked. "Karen," I shrugged, "maybe from here, but somewhere else, there's another clipboard, another HOA, another story starting." He didn't look worried, just tired, older, maybe. "Well," he said, "let's hope they read the fine print this time." I smiled, "or at least check the deed before they swing a backhoe." The truth is, I never wanted a fight. But some homes are more than lumber and nails. They're stories, grief, roots. Karen gave me 72 hours to sell the only place that still smelled like my wife's shampoo. So I gave her 30 days to pay rent on dirt she didn't even know she was standing on. In the end, she lost her title, her building, and her fake little kingdom of clipped hedges and forged memos. Me? I kept my land, I kept my name, I kept my son, and peace, real peace, not the kind written into bylaws, but the kind you build with your own hands and defend without ever raising your voice. Turns out, you can't evict a man from his legacy, especially not when he is the foundation. They say neighborhoods are built on trust, but sometimes all it takes is one clipboard and a bad haircut to turn it into a battlefield. This story isn't just about zoning maps, fake fines, or power-hungry Karen types. It's about standing your ground quietly, legally, relentlessly. Because when bullies hide behind bylaws, the strongest weapon you can wield is the truth wrapped in paperwork. You don't have to scream to fight back. You don't even have to slam the door. Sometimes you just raise the rent. So if you've ever been pushed, silenced, or told to sit down in your own home, don't. Your roots go deeper than their rules. And remember, empires built on arrogance crumble faster than fences built on family. Now it's your turn. Ever faced a Karen in your life? Drop your story below, share this if you've ever defended your peace, and hit like if you believe a man's home is still his castle.